Hello and welcome to the aircraft lighting lesson in the PMDG 737 Next Generation Groundwork from Angle of Attack. This lesson will cover the following topics. We'll start off with a very brief overview of the lighting systems on the 737NG. Then we'll move on to exterior lighting, flight deck lighting, and the no smoking and seatbelt signs. Exterior lights are used to illuminate taxiways and runways and to enhance visibility for other aircraft and controllers. Controls for the exterior lights are located on the forward overhead panel. Flight deck lighting is used to illuminate the various panels, controls, and indications in the cockpit. And the controls for the flight deck lighting are scattered throughout the flight deck. Towards the end of the lesson, we will also briefly discuss the no smoking and seatbelt signs. Under the exterior lighting banner, we will be discussing the following sets of exterior lights. We'll start off with the landing lights, both retractable and fixed, and then we'll talk about the runway turn-off lights, the taxi light, logo lights, position and strobe lights, the anti-collision lights, wing lights, and the wheel well lights. We will be omitting the emergency exit and slide lights used in an evacuation, as we cover those in the emergency equipment lesson. The landing lights are used to increase the visibility of the aircraft to other pilots, controllers, and personnel on the ground. They also, albeit to a fairly limited extent, illuminate the runway ahead of the aircraft. These are used during takeoff, climb out, approach, and landing. There are two different types of landing lights, retractable and fixed. The retractable landing light switches are located on the captain's side of the forward overhead panel, and the lights themselves are located just inboard of the pack ram air inlets on the underside of the fuselage. Each retractable landing light switch has three positions: retract, extend, and on. With the switch in the retract position, the lights are off and stowed. With the switch in the extend position, the light is extended from its stowed position, but is still off. With the switch in the on position, the lights are extended and illuminated. There is no speed restriction on the retractable landing lights, but it is common practice not to use them above 250 knots to reduce stress on the hinges. The fixed landing light switches are located right next to the retractable landing light switches, and the lights themselves are located at each wing root and shine at a fixed angle. The fixed landing light switches only have two positions, off and on. There's a gang bar that can be used to turn on and extend all of the landing lights simultaneously. The bar simply forces all of the switches to the on position and then spring loads aft again once released. The runway turn-off lights are used to illuminate taxiway turn-offs in low light conditions. They shine forward and to the side of the aircraft. The runway turn-off light switches are located on the captain's side of the forward overhead panel, beside the landing light switches, and the lights themselves are located beside the fixed landing lights in the wing roots. There are two switches, one each for the left and the right lights respectively, and these are simply two position switches, off and on. The taxi light is used to illuminate the path ahead of the aircraft and to increase its visibility to other aircraft, controllers, and ground personnel. The taxi light switch is located on the captain's side of the forward overhead panel, beside the runway turn-off light switches. The light itself is mounted on the nose gear leg and therefore shines wherever the nose gear is pointed. The switch is a two-position switch, simply off and on. When the gear is retracted, the taxi light will automatically turn off. The logo lights are used to illuminate the airline logo on the tail of the aircraft. There is a single switch on the first officer's side of the forward overhead panel, and the logo lights themselves are located on the horizontal stabilizer. They are angled upwards towards the vertical stabilizer, or the tail, to illuminate the airline logo. The switch is simply selectable on and off. The position lights are used by other aircraft to determine the orientation and direction of your aircraft based on the color of the light visible. There are 4 position lights on the aircraft. There's a red light on the left wingtip, a green light on the right wingtip, and a white light on the trailing edge of each wingtip. Because each light is only visible from a certain angle, another pilot can determine the orientation and direction of your aircraft with respect to his by interpretation of the color of the light visible to him. The position light switch is located on the first officer's side of the forward overhead panel and has control over 7 lights on the aircraft. It is a 3-position switch: off, steady, and strobe and steady. The steady position illuminates the red and green position lights on the left and right wingtips respectively, and the white position lights on each wingtip. With the switch in the strobe and steady position, the position lights remain illuminated but are now joined by the strobe lights. The strobe lights are used to increase visibility of the aircraft to others and are extremely effective at night. There is a white strobe light on each wingtip and a white strobe light on the tail cone just above the APU eductor inlet. With the switch set off, neither the position nor the strobe lights will operate. So to summarize, with the position switch in the steady position, only the red, green, and white position lights are illuminated. With the switch in the strobe and steady position, the strobe lights will flash in addition to the position lights. This single switch therefore has control over 7 individual lights on the aircraft, and with the switch in the off position, none of these lights will be illuminated. The anti-collision lights are red strobe lights mounted on the top and bottom of the fuselage. They are switched on before engine start to alert ground personnel that startup is imminent, and then remain on the entire flight until shutdown to increase the visibility of the aircraft. The anti-collision light switch is located on the first officer's side of the forward overhead panel, and the lights themselves are located on the top and the bottom of the fuselage. Again, this is a simple 2-position switch, off and on. The wing lights are used to illuminate the leading edge of each wing and are useful to scan for ice. The wing light switch is located on the first officer's side of the forward overhead panel, and the lights themselves are mounted in each side of the fuselage, angled aft towards the leading edge of each wing. This is another 2-position switch, simply off and on. The wheel well lights are used to illuminate the nose and the main landing gear wheel wells. These lights are useful for inspection in low light conditions and are located within each wheel well. The nose gear wheel well has a single light, and the main gear wheel well has 4 lights. The wheel well light switch on the first officer's side of the forward overhead panel controls all 5 of these lights. And this is another 2-position switch, off and on. Let's move on to the second half of this lesson now and discuss the flight deck lighting. We will be discussing the following flight deck lighting topics in this section. We'll start with the dome lights, then the overhead and circuit breaker panel lighting, map and chart lighting, main instrument panel and glare shield lighting, pedestal lighting, standby magnetic compass lighting, display unit brightness controls, and the annunciator light's brightness control. The dome lights are used to provide incandescent illumination of the entire flight deck. The switch is located on the aft overhead panel, and the 2 dome lights themselves are located on the aft flight deck wall, either side of the cockpit door. There is actually a second bulb located in the dome light to the right of the door as we look aft that is part of the emergency lighting system. This auxiliary bulb is usually switched off, but will illuminate when the emergency lighting system is activated. We'll of course be discussing more of the emergency lighting system in the emergency equipment lesson. The dome light switch has 3 positions: dim, off, and bright, and these positions are fairly self-explanatory. Lighting controls for the overhead and circuit breaker panels are located on the forward overhead panel. The circuit breaker light switch is located in the middle of the forward overhead panel, and this is used to illuminate the P6 and P18 circuit breaker panels on the aft flight deck wall. The P6 panel is to the left of the flight deck door as we look aft, and the P18 to the right. Each of these panels has various sub-panels. The P6 panel has 6 sub-panels, and the P18 has 3. Below the circuit breaker light control is the overhead panel light control. This switch is used to control the backlighting of the controls and indications on the forward and aft overhead panels. Both of these controls can be rotated to adjust the brightness of the lighting. Map and chart lighting are available via controls on the sidewall panels. The map light control adjusts the brightness of the overhead map light, and the chart light control adjusts the light directed onto the chart holder. These light controls are present for both the captain and the first officer. Lighting controls for the main instrument panel and glare shield are located below the inboard and outboard display units on each side of the flight deck. The main panel control on the captain's side adjusts the brightness of the backlighting on the captain's main instrument panel, the center panel, and also controls the brightness of the mode control panel's LCD displays and backlighting. The main panel control on the first officer's side performs an identical function, but only for the first officer's main instrument panel and instrument backlighting. The background control, found only on the captain's side, controls flood lighting for the entire main instrument panel. The AFDS flood control controls the brightness of flood lighting directed at the mode control panel and the EFIS control panels. Each one of these is a rheostat type control that allows lighting brightness to be tuned to your liking. They are variable transformers that adjust the voltage available to the lighting modules located just underneath the main instrument panel. Similarly to the main instrument panel, flood and backlighting are available for the center pedestal. The panel control adjusts the controls and switches backlighting from the 2 CDUs all the way back to the aft electronics panel. It also adjusts the brightness of the LCD displays on the radios and the transponder, but the display on the HGS control panel is not affected. The flood control, also on the aft electronics panel, adjusts flood illumination of this area. The light itself is mounted within the forward overhead panel. The standby magnetic compass, located at the top of the center post above the glare shield, has its own lighting controls. This is a very simple 3-position switch: dim, off, and bright. Brightness controls are also available for the 6 display units on the flight deck. The captain has control over his outboard and inboard display units, as well as the upper and the lower display units. The inboard and lower DU controls have dual functionality. The outer knobs control the DU brightness, while the inner knobs control the brightness of the weather radar and terrain displays. Both the inboard and lower DU brightness controls have dual functionality, as the navigation display can be displayed on either of these 2 display units depending on how the display select panel is configured. The first officer also has display unit brightness controls, but only for his inboard and outboard display units. There are brightness controls for a few other displays around the flight deck, such as the IRS display unit and the 2 control display units, but we cover those in their associated lessons, so we won't go over them now. The master lights test and dim switch is located on the center panel and is used to control the brightness of the annunciator lights in the cockpit. It has 3 positions: test, bright, and dim. When the switch is held to the test position, it illuminates the vast majority of the annunciator lights on the flight deck. Each MCP display self-tests, both clocks display test patterns, and the radio and transponder LCDs on the aft electronics panel self-test as well. Note that the fire warning system is not tested by this switch, rather by a separate switch on the overheat and fire protection panel. We cover that in the fire protection lesson, of course. The test position also results in a master caution recall when the switch is released, so any lights associated with current faults will remain illuminated on the master caution 6-packs. It's worth remembering this. The no smoking and seatbelt sign switches are located in the middle of the forward overhead panel. Note that in our case on this aircraft, the no smoking switch is simply used as a means of chiming the cabin. The fasten seatbelt switch has 3 positions: off, auto, and on. With the switch in the auto position, the signs will be illuminated whenever the gear or flaps are extended and extinguished whenever the gear and flaps are retracted. The on and off positions are self-explanatory, but we do not recommend auto as the signs will tend to switch off sooner than is preferable. We will finish up here with a lesson summary and run through what we've covered so far. A subject like aircraft lighting seems fairly simple at face value, but in total we've covered 30 individual switches and knobs on the flight deck that control over 20 lights on the outside of the aircraft and countless more within. Let's run through a summary of the lighting systems that we've covered during this lesson. In the exterior lighting category, we covered the landing lights, both retractable and fixed, runway turn-off lights, the taxi lights, logo lights, position and strobe lights, the anti-collision lights, wing lights, and the wheel well lights. In the flight deck lighting category, we covered the dome lights, the overhead and circuit breaker panel lighting, map and chart lighting, main panel and glare shield lighting, the pedestal lighting, standby magnetic compass lighting, display unit brightness controls, and finally, the annunciator light brightness control. We concluded with a brief coverage of the no smoking and fasten seatbelt signs. We hope you enjoyed this lesson.